When night falls, shadows start to move. The city might be asleep, but inside these concrete giants, fear is wide awake. We've all heard those whispers, the stories shared in hushed tones about things that go bump in the night. But what if those whispers were more than just stories? What if they were cries for help, echoing through the vents and pipes of your own apartment building? Tonight, we dive into the unsettling world of apartment living, where thin walls separate us from the unknown, and the familiar hum of the refrigerator becomes a chilling lullaby. These are true stories, straight from reality, showing that the scariest monsters don't hide in the shadows. They live right next door. So, Sarah was pretty used to the constant noise of the city, the sirens, the hum of traffic. It was just part of her life in her cozy third-floor apartment. But tonight, there was a different sound. Someone was knocking on her door, slowly and deliberately. It was past midnight. Definitely not the time for visitors. She felt a chill run down her spine. Maybe it was just a neighbor who got the wrong door, but deep down, she had a bad feeling about it. The knocking came again, this time more urgent. With trembling hands, Sarah reached for her phone, her heart racing. Sarah held her breath and peeked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. She felt a brief moment of relief, but it quickly turned into a deeper sense of dread. Who was messing with her? She stepped back from the door, her eyes darting around the room, searching for answers. Then she saw it, a photograph she didn't recognize lying face down on her coffee table. Curiosity mixed with unease made her pick it up. It was an old, faded black and white photo of a woman in a long gown. Her face was hidden in shadows, but the way she seemed to stare directly at Sarah gave her chills. As Sarah looked at the photo, the knocking started again. This time, it was more urgent. Panic set in. She needed to call for help. Sarah was fumbling with her phone, trying to dial 911, but her fingers just wouldn't cooperate. The knocking at the door got louder and more frantic. All of a sudden, the room got really cold, and the air felt thick and heavy. Sarah felt like someone was behind her, and a chill ran down her spine. She slowly turned around, her eyes wide with terror. There, in the middle of her living room, bathed in an eerie light, was the woman from the photograph. Her face was still hard to see, but her eyes, they burned with a cold, malevolent fire. Sarah tried to scream, but no sound came out. She was completely paralyzed with fear, trapped in what felt like a living nightmare. So, there was this ghostly figure gliding towards Sarah, with a shadowy hand reaching out like it wanted to touch her cheek. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, bracing herself for whatever was coming next. But guess what? The touch never came. When she finally opened her eyes, the room was empty. The woman had vanished as quickly as she had appeared. The knocking stopped, leaving behind an eerie silence that was somehow even creepier. Sarah was left trembling on the floor, clutching a photograph with the woman's chilling eyes burned into her memory. The whole experience left her shaken, questioning her sanity. Was it a dream, a hallucination, or did she just have a terrifying encounter with something truly unexplainable? Mark was super excited about his new apartment. It was a fresh start in a brand new city. Sure, the building had its quirks, like the flickering lights in the hallway and those weird drafts that seemed to come from nowhere. But he just thought of them as part of the charm of an older building. While unpacking boxes in his bathroom, he noticed a large, ornately framed mirror hanging above the sink. It was an antique, left behind by the previous tenant, and Mark had thought about selling it. But there was something about its antique elegance that made him keep it. As he caught his reflection, he felt a little uneasy. It was probably just his imagination, still getting used to the new place. But for a split second he could have sworn his reflection didn't blink. Shaking off the weird feeling, Mark went back to unpacking. But as the days turned into nights, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, like there was always someone or something just out of sight. So one night, Mark was just brushing his teeth, right? He glanced at the mirror and suddenly froze. His reflection was gone, and instead, there was this image of another man. This guy looked older, with a gaunt, pale face and hollow eyes that were just empty. He stared back at Mark and then he smiled, showing these teeth that were way too sharp, almost predatory. Mark's heart was pounding in his chest. He blinked, hoping the creepy face would go away, but it didn't. It just kept staring at him, sending chills down his spine. His grip on the toothbrush tightened, his knuckles turning white. He had to force himself to look away, to break the spell of that terrifying reflection. When he looked back, his own reflection was there again, but the image of that strange man stayed in his mind. Mark was really shaken up by what happened. He kept telling himself it was just a trick of the light, or maybe his imagination playing games with him, but deep down, he knew better. What he saw in the mirror wasn't his reflection. It was something sinister, something not quite human. And sleep? Forget about it. He was haunted by nightmares of that creepy figure in the mirror. Even during the day he couldn't shake the fear. He started avoiding mirrors, terrified of what might be staring back at him, but the feeling of being watched never left him. It was like the mirror had eyes, always following his every move. Mark became a shell of his former self, his once bright personality now overshadowed by fear and paranoia. He started seeing that eerie figure everywhere, in his phone screen, the window of a bus, even in the shadows on the street. So, one night Mark just couldn't handle it anymore. He was at his breaking point. He grabbed a hammer from his toolbox, his hands shaking with a mix of fear and determination. Standing in front of the mirror, he stared at his reflection. It seemed to waver and distort, almost like a stranger was looking back at him. With a primal scream, Mark swung the hammer, shattering the mirror into countless pieces. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the apartment, followed by an eerie silence. Mark stared at the shattered remains of the mirror, his chest heaving, sweat dripping down his face. He had destroyed the mirror, but had he really gotten rid of the evil it reflected? Or had he just unleashed something even more sinister into his world? They say the city never sleeps, right? Well, try telling that to Mark, the night security guard at Grandview Apartments. The only things awake there were the shadows, and maybe something else. Grandview was this massive high-rise 15 floors of steel and glass, but for Mark, it felt more like a prison with those flickering lights and the eerie silence of the graveyard shift. Mark knew every creak and groan of that old building, but tonight, something felt off, like there was an unwelcome guest. He checked the security monitors, eyes scanning the static-filled screens, finger hovering over the intercom button. He shook his head, trying to brush off the feeling, but it stuck with him, like a cold whisper on his neck. It was probably just the fatigue and solitude messing with his mind. He kept doing his rounds, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallways, the only sound being the rhythmic click of his flashlight against his palm. So, as he walked up to the elevator, the doors just slid open on their own, showing an empty cabin with this eerie, flickering light. He got in, and the doors closed behind him with a heavy thud that echoed through the empty lobby. He hit the button for the 10th floor, and the only sound was the gentle hum of the elevator starting to move up. But then, out of nowhere, the elevator shuddered, the lights flickered like crazy, and it just stopped. Mark grabbed the handrail, his heart racing as he looked at the numbers above the door. He wasn't on the 10th floor, he was on the 8th, floor 8. A chill ran down his spine. Grandview Apartments didn't even have an 8th floor. The building went straight from the 7th to the 9th during construction. Mark knew that for sure. He pressed the button for the 10th floor again, his finger lingering on it, but nothing happened. The elevator stayed stuck, trapped between floors. And then, he heard it. A soft whisper, almost too quiet to notice, coming from the other side of the elevator doors. It was a woman's voice, sounding both sad and creepy. He couldn't understand the words, but the sound gave him chills. He stepped back from the doors, his eyes wide with fear. The air felt heavy, filled with an invisible dread. The temperature dropped suddenly, and he could see his breath forming a cloud. He sensed a presence, cold and menacing, right on the other side of the door. He knew he had to get out, but the elevator buttons wouldn't work. He was stuck. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and he saw her. A shadowy figure, barely visible in the darkness, staring at him through the gap in the elevator doors. It was a woman with long dark hair covering her face, and her eyes had an eerie, unnatural glow. Panic hit him hard. He threw himself against the doors, but they just wouldn't move. The whispers got louder. The creepy voice seemed to crawl into his bones, freezing him in place. He shut his eyes tight, his heart pounding like it was trying to escape his chest. Then, just like that, the whispering stopped. He opened his eyes, gasping. The figure was gone. The elevator jerked back to life, shooting upwards at a crazy speed. He held his breath until the doors finally opened on the 10th floor. He stumbled out, legs like jelly, body shaking. He never looked back. The memory of the 8th floor burned into his mind. From that night on, Mark avoided the elevator, his fear a constant reminder of the 8th floor's chilling secret. So, we've just heard 3 spine-chilling stories, giving us a peek into the eerie side of everyday life. First, the midnight knocking, a story that shows some secrets just won't stay hidden. Then, the stranger in the mirror, reminding us that our homes can hide some pretty scary stuff. And finally, the 8th floor of the elevator, taking us on a creepy ride through an ordinary building. But what if these aren't just stories? What if they're glimpses into a reality we can't fully grasp? A reminder that we might not be alone in our homes? Something ancient, unseen, and always watching. So when you turn off the lights tonight, just remember, sometimes the scariest things aren't outside but right where we feel safest, our homes.